Switzerland appears to have thousands and thousands of vacancies, yet qualified candidates actually spending months applying and receiving quite a lot of rejections, and sometimes not even getting a single meaningful interview. So who's actually being hired then? And why can someone have Swiss qualifications, relevant experience, and a professionally written CV and yet still completely feel locked out of the market? Because the problem is not always that you're actually unqualified. Sometimes the vacancy is real, but the opportunity is not as open as it appears. And later in this video, I'll explain the one question that you need to ask yourself before investing hours in another application. Top of the morning, everyone. My name is Tiri and I'm back with another video. Today we're talking honestly about why finding work in Switzerland can feel almost impossible for so many people. Because once you understand what is happening behind the scenes, you can stop blaming yourself and actually start approaching the market more strategically. First thing first, the numbers that are actually being put out there and the reality do not feel the same. On paper, Switzerland still looks like a very strong employment market. Unemployment remains relatively low compared to, so many different European countries, and thousands of roles keep on actually appearing online. But that does not mean hiring is actually moving quickly. In fact, low unemployment can also make employers even more cautious. In a very cautious market, the company may actually wait for someone with all 5 requirements, plus local experience, 2 Swiss languages, knowledge of that industry, and possibly a personal introduction from someone called. Employers are afraid of actually making the wrong hire, so they actually search for the lowest risk candidates. And that brings us to the first invisible filter that you'll always have. Language is not just a requirement. Switzerland is not just one job market. It is several regional job markets sitting next to one another. A candidate applying in Zurich may be evaluated very differently from someone applying in Geneva, Lausanne, Basel, or even Lugano. You may see a role advertised in English, but that does not always mean English is enough for that particular role. The interview might also be conducted in English. The company documentation might also be in English, but the hiring manager may still prefer someone who can actually build relationships with the German-speaking colleagues or the French-speaking colleagues, communicate with French-speaking clients or German-speaking clients, or understand Swiss German during any informal conversations. And yes, Swiss German deserves its own category. You might also spend years learning high German, arrive confidently at the office, and someone starts speaking in a dialect at full speed. I've felt that so many times, where half the time I'm like, I thought I knew what the people were supposed to be saying in German, but now you listen to Swiss German, it's a completely different language. Suddenly your B2 certificate feels like a decorative stationery. But here's a more serious point. Language is often used as proxy for integration. Even when you apply for a Swiss passport, that is one of the key things that they look for. An employer may look at your language skills and suddenly ask themselves, can this person communicate with our clients? Will they understand the working culture? Are they likely to stay in Switzerland? This is why simply writing basic German or French in progress may not always be enough for that application. You need to actually show active integration. Language is only one part of a risk calculation when it comes to hiring decisions. The next filter can actually affect you even when your qualifications are excellent. The local experience trap. One of the most frustrating phrases in Swiss job market is Swiss experience preferred. Because how do you get Swiss experience when nobody will hire you without a Swiss experience? It is a professional version of needing experience to get experience. What employers are often looking for is not simply experience gained inside Switzerland. They're looking for evidence that you actually understand the local expectations. A candidate can have 10 years of international experience and still lose to someone with 3 years of directly relevant Swiss experience. Not because the international candidate is less capable, the local candidate simply feels easier to understand. Your international experience cannot remain international in the way you actually describe it. You need to translate it into the Swiss relevance. Instead of saying I manage regional stakeholders across several global markets, you could actually say something like I coordinated multilingual stakeholders across regulated European markets, experience directly relevant to Switzerland's decentralized and multicultural business environment. I know it sounds longer, but it at least gives people that understanding that you actually understand the Swiss decentralized multicultural business environments. Same experience, different story. And in a competitive market, the story determines whether the employer can picture you in that particular role. But sometimes the employer can already picture someone else in the role before your application even arrives. The role may already have a favorite candidate, the internal candidates or the referrals. Companies advertise positions for many legislative reasons. Sometimes they actually are required to follow an open recruitment process, and sometimes they want to compare the market. Sometimes an internal candidate is already being considered, but the company still wants external options. That does not automatically mean the vacancy is fake. It means the company may not necessarily begin at zero. An internal candidate already understands the systems, the culture, and the people of that particular company. A referred candidate arrives with already that borrowed trust. You arrive with a PDF. That PDF has a lot of emotional work to do. This is why applications alone are not often enough, particularly for mid-level to senior positions. You need relationships before vacancies even apply. That could mean actually attending industry events, joining professional associations, reconnecting with former colleagues, speaking to recruiters, or even asking people in your network for information rather than immediately asking for a job. And the internal competition is not the only competition you cannot see. Your role may also be competing against another country. Nearshoring and offshoring have changed the map. One of the most interesting things about COVID is that it's actually taught a lot of companies that many jobs do not need to be performed in the same building. And once companies actually accepted that, another question started to appear. If the work can be done remotely or in another country, does it need to be done in Switzerland? For roles in IT, administration, finance and operations, customer support, data processing, and any other shared services, some companies can hire in what they would consider to be lower cost European locations or move functions to international service centers. This does not mean every Swiss job is being outsourced, but it does mean that some candidates are not only competing with people in Zurich, Bern, or Geneva, they may be competing with an entire team in Poland, Portugal, Romania, India, or any other low-cost location that's out there. I've had jobs in the past where I applied for the job and then 2 days later I see that job popping up in another country. This is one reason that a role can disappear halfway through the recruitment process where you're still waiting for feedback. Career switching is honestly one of the hardest things in a very cautious market. Career switching sounds very inspiring on LinkedIn. Be bold, reinvent yourself, follow your passion. Sounds amazing, doesn't it? Then you apply for entry-level roles and the employer asks for 4 years of direct experience. You may have transferable skills, but the employer sees transition risks when they look at your CV. They wonder whether you actually understand the industry, whether you will accept the salary, whether you are actually genuinely committed, or whether you will leave once the role becomes available in another previous field that you're actually in. This is why saying, I want a new challenge, is not a convincing career change explanation. You need to build a bridge between the old career and the new one. For example, I'm moving from hospitality management into customer success because the part of my work I've actually consistently performed best as client onboarding, relationship management, and resolving service issues. That explanation has a lot of logic. It shows continuity rather than a random escape from one industry to the next. You may also need an intermediate step, a project, certificate, temporary contract, internship. But during uncertain hiring periods, companies often choose proven relevant experience over potential. The more career risk you actually appear to represent, the more evidence you need to actually remove that particular risk. For international candidates, another risk calculation happens before the recruiter even evaluates the career story. Work permits changes the conversation. Work authorization matters. That's why in most applications, you'll always see the questions that say, do you have authority to work in the local location or in the location that you're applying to? EU and EFTA nationals, generally have more straightforward access to the Swiss labor market than anybody from outside, which is called third country nationals. For third country nationals, employers may face stricter conditions, permit quotas, and even requirement to demonstrate that the recruitment priorities have actually been respected. That creates additional work and uncertainty for the employer. So when two candidates appear equally suitable, but one can start without a complicated permit process, the decision may be made before the interview stage even starts. This is not the reason to actually give up, but you at least understand your position very clearly. Do not write vague statements such as eligible to work internationally. State your exact permit status if you already have one. Clarity helps the recruiter assess the situation immediately, but lying about the visa that you already have causes even more problems for you and your applications in future. But what about candidates who already live here, speak the language, and actually have Swiss qualifications? Remember guys, Swiss qualifications do not guarantee you access. A Swiss degree or certificate can improve your credibility in the job market. It does not guarantee you interviews. Education can show that you actually understand the academic and the technical requirements of a profession. It cannot automatically prove that you have industry network, practical experience, or even specific profile the employer actually is looking for. This is very painful for international graduates when they finish their studies. You study in Switzerland, complete the program, build a life here, and assume the local qualification will open the market. Then employer asks for experience. You apply for junior roles, but they say you actually are overqualified. You apply for experience role, but they say you are underexperienced. You somehow too much and not enough at the same time. And I know guys, it is very exhausting, but qualifications are not useless at all. They simply need supporting evidence. Projects, internships, working student positions, research collaborations, professional associations, any alumni relationships that you've actually built can turn the qualification into the market access. And then lastly, an advertised job is not always active hiring. A job advertisement can exist for several reasons. The company may actively be hiring. It may be collecting applications for future needs. It may also be replacing someone, but the budget has not been fully confirmed yet. Or the reality is it may be comparing external candidates with internal candidates. The role may have already been paused, changed, or quietly cancelled while the advertisement sometimes remains online. Some companies also keep recurring positions visible because they regularly need the same type of talent, which is evergreens. That vacancy may be real in the broad sense, but there may not be immediate seat available for someone to actually fill in the next month. This is why the number of advertisements online does not equal the number of people companies are actually hiring today. And here's the question that I promised you at the beginning. Is there evidence that this company is actively hiring for this particular position right now? Look at the publication date. Check whether the role has been reposted repeatedly. Here's the question that everybody wants to know. What should job seekers actually do differently? The answer is not to submit another 50 generic applications. In the job market, volume without direction creates exhaustion. Start by identifying where your profile actually has the lowest level of perceived risk. Which regions matches your language and will you be physically able to actually go to? Which companies value your international experience? And then also which industries are actively hiring, where do you already have relationships, and which positions generally match the 70 or 80% of your background. Then adjust your applications around the employer's uncertainty to try and answer some of those questions. So, is the Swiss job market broken? Not completely. But there's a real disconnect between the number of opportunities candidates can actually see and the number they can genuinely access. The market has definitely cooled down. Guys, if you found these tips helpful, please don't forget to like, share, subscribe for more content that's actually designed to help you navigate your career path with confidence and skill. Until we meet again in the next video, peace.